I'd like to welcome everybody. This is a makeup session for the xAPI cohort a couple weeks ago when Brit was unable to join us, but we certainly wanted to capture and share what she has to say about data visualization and learning analytics. So we're going to make this recording. We're going to share it a few different ways. And I will try to be the entire audience, and I'll try to capture some good questions that we might get from attendees if this had happened at the regular session. So with that, Brit Keller, Yet Analytics, I'll let you give a little bit of an intro of yourself and launch right into it.
Thank you so much, Peter. Hi, everyone, and I apologize for missing the live session. I'm very grateful to have the chance to record this with Peter. My name is Brit Keller. I'm on the team here at Yet Analytics. We are an xAPI Learning Record Store vendor, but in addition to that, we actually provide a lot of consultation and expertise around how to make that data more usable. So we do a lot of work around learning analytics and helping our customers and partners think through how to extract the most value from the data assets that they're building through xAPI. So let's get started with the presentation today on data visualization and learning analytics. Some of the things we're going to talk about, I want to go through a little bit about why data visualization is important. Then we'll talk a bit about data planning. I will walk you through some basic data visualizations that's tied directly back to the core components of an xAPI data statement. Then we'll move on to some more complex questions that can be answered using xAPI. And then last but not least, I just wanted to have a little fun section talking about kind of where can data visualization and learning analytics go from here and start brainstorming a bit about the future state of learning analytics. So first of all, let's talk about why data visualization is important, why the Torrance Learning Group wanted to actually bring an entire session and talk just about data visualization. I think that's particularly relevant in the realm of xAPI because xAPI enables vast amounts of high-resolution data to be captured. But simply having access to tons and tons of data does not make it usable. So putting some really careful thought and planning into what kind of information specifically you want to extract from that data, using that to design very well thought out and usable data visualizations is a pretty critical component to making your data more useful. We want to ultimately be able to use xAPI data and other data assets to derive better data-driven decision-making within our organizations. So data visualizations become a really important part of that. I did put together a handful of recent data visualizations that I thought were particularly interesting and relevant and well done. I'm kind of a data geek, so I did spend a lot of time actually sorting through these things. Hopefully you'll enjoy them as well. So let's get started here. All right. So the first one, the animation's actually not coming through in this format, but this is an animated data visualization that actually shows the baby boomer generation and how it relates to other generational bands over time. So it starts in 1950, kind of shows how the baby boomer generation moves and shifts through time all the way up through 2050. So super interesting, relevant, and intuitive way to consume what would have been a very large amount of data if viewed in a tabular format. And I'll try to make sure I send that animated GIF over so you guys can see it in action. But it's actually a really beautiful and well done demonstration of showing a large amount of information in a very easily consumable way. The next data visualization, actually I wanted to show how you can use data visualization to answer a very specific question. So the question here would be, what does screenplay dialogue look like when broken down by gender, and specifically focusing on animated Disney movies? So just at a glance, you can see right away that for most Disney animated movies, men have the majority of lines. Only 4 movies out of Disney in the animated world actually have the majority of lines, and we only have 5 movies in total that have achieved a gender balance. So trying to consume this data and come to this decision or understanding of the data set using tabular data would have taken a very long time, not been a very simple or user-friendly experience for the analyst. Using this sort of data visualization quickly and clearly delivers the information that you're looking for. Another data visualization that I thought was great, this one was produced by the New York Times, and actually is an interactive data visualization. It allows the user to input a number of different elements, such as current income, how long they're planning to stay in a residence, etc. And the data visualization will actually show them at the end of the day, it shows them whether or not they should rent or buy based on the inputs that they provided. I thought this was a really fantastic, easy, simple way to take what is really a complex decision-making process, make it super simple and available to any user. So great example of data visualization enabling faster data-driven decision-making. Another great example of data visualization is using it to map trends or patterns in your data. This is also courtesy of New York Times. They have a really fantastic group of people who specialize in data visualizations. This actually maps out the East Asian currency wars. If you follow the dot on the map, it actually moves in the direction of which of these three currencies, between China, Korea, and Japan, where the currency is stronger relative to the other currencies. Such a fascinating way to see at a glance how these East Asian currency wars have been progressing over time. Last but not least, another one that I really like, this one is courtesy of Selfie City. Data visualizations can actually be used to synthesize and aggregate a ton of different data points and present user behavior to you in a really simple, easy to use way. So this particular example, Selfie City analyzed over 3,000 different selfies and then produced at the top of this image, you can see user behavior when taking a selfie. Is there a head tilt? Is their mouth open or closed? Are they facing forward or to the profile? So on and so forth. So really beautiful, great design to help you better understand user data from what would have been a massive data set. Ultimately, when it comes to data visualization, I like to break it down to, would you rather make decisions based on a series of tabular reports in Excel or otherwise, or would you rather make decisions based on beautiful data visualization that presents the information clearly and intuitively? Arguably, what you're seeing here is actually the world's most famous data visualization. This is Menard's graph of Napoleon's march to Moscow. I think my high school history professor would be very disappointed with me if I did a presentation on data visualization and did not include this particular view. It is a really great example of taking in multiple and complex data points, presenting them in one very simple, synthesized way to tell a very compelling story. The tan line at the top, the thicker line, represents Napoleon's troops as they marched to Moscow. I think he started out with something like 470,000 troops, which is why the band on the left side is so wide. And then the black line below that actually represents their retreat. And as you can see, that line shrinks dramatically when they came back. He only had 10,000 troops with him. So wildly recognized as a failure of a mission and a march. And at the very bottom of this is the actual temperatures. You can map the temperature throughout the march to and from. So again, arguably one of the most famous data visualizations ever produced because it tells a very complex story in a very simple way. So that is some basics on why I think data visualization can be so powerful in general. But how do you produce good data visualization? Well, it comes down to data planning at the beginning. So I know in session 5, Janet gave a great presentation on how to start planning around your data strategy. So I don't actually want to spend a ton of time here. I just want to highlight a couple of the items that she actually talked about as well and bring it back to why it's so important from a data visualization and analytics standpoint. So we'll start at the top. I would say one of the most important things to do related to data viz is to make sure at the onset of your project you are identifying critical objectives of the project. Ask yourself questions like, what means success for this project? And importantly, how will I measure it? As you ask those questions, what you'll start to find is you're developing a list of success measures or key performance indicators that are aligned to the project that will help you determine, am I achieving success or not, and what elements are helping me to achieve that success. It's really easy at this stage to go overboard. I know I myself will sometimes develop these lists of 25 or 30 success metrics associated with a project. There's so many different areas I want to be able to measure and kind of tally up to the top to say this was successful because of all these detailed elements. But the key here is to really keep it simple. So you can identify as many success measures as you want, but really try to prioritize the top 3 to 5 that you think actually tell the most compelling story or add the most value to that project. Think about it this way. If you are ultimately developing a dashboard, having a dashboard of 3 to 5 really great KPIs that you're able to measure to determine success of the project is much more usable and best practice when it comes to measuring a program. If you're trying to look at a dashboard that's showing you 35 different KPIs, it's a bit harder to say ultimately, hey, I'm achieving success or I'm not. So identify as many as you want. Make sure you keep it simple and try to prioritize down to the top 3 to 5 success metrics that you actually want to track. Once you have those success measures defined, now you want to map them back to your data elements. This is the process through which you'll be able to clearly say, as I build an xAPI statement, I know precisely which data elements I need to include in that and where I want to capture them in the xAPI statement so that I can ultimately fuel the data visualizations that mean the most to me. So document both data sources and elements, map them to each one of those success measures. Make sure as you're doing this, you're also identifying data gaps. Now, sometimes you'll find that you've identified the gap, but it's actually not critical to the overall data visualization. It's something that you can work without. Those are okay, good to note, and then move on. And in some cases, you'll say, I really need to figure out a way to fill this gap or capture this data to effectively produce the success measure that I need to in order to measure success. So an important step here is just that process of data mapping and then the gap analysis itself. And then last but not least, while you're doing this, make sure you're thinking through and injecting semantic consistency as you define the concepts that are important to you from both a success measurement standpoint as well as xAPI statement building. Make sure you document that and that you really stay consistent with it. And take each one of those data elements that will help fuel the data visualization itself and map that to where it should live in an xAPI statement. The good news here is not only are you really well documenting and thinking through a data strategy that will ultimately align to the kinds of data visualization and analytics that you want to produce with the data that you'll be providing, but you've also started the building blocks for an xAPI profile. These are precisely some of the elements you need to think through as you down the road think about building out potentially a custom xAPI profile for the data ecosystem that you've just built. All right, so I'm going to take a moment and pause there. Any questions so far, Peter? How are we doing?
It's sounding great, making a lot of sense. You've got some great sample visualizations. I have to say I did not see the Napoleon visualization when I was in high school. I've only started seeing it the last couple of years, so I guess I need to go back and have a conversation with my history teacher. But no, I think we're going great.
Yeah, we spent way too much time looking at that thing when I was a teenager. Okay, well, good. Glad you're tracking so far. Thank you for the feedback. So let's move on. Let's actually start looking through some data visualizations that are tied specifically back to some of the core components of an xAPI data statement. And specifically, we're looking at things like actor, verb, object, and some of the context fields. What I'm about to show you are data visualizations directly from some of the dashboards that Yet Analytics has built and offered as part of our standard LRS package, but also some of the things that we've custom designed for very specific questions that our customers have had for us. So it's just a good way to start thinking about what are the common questions that we usually want to answer with a given set of xAPI data. One that kind of tops the list, almost everybody wants to know this, are who are my most or least engaged actors? Using an xAPI data set, it's actually pretty easy to start to pull in data visualizations that tell the story of most engaged actors and least engaged actors. And in this particular scenario, we're actually measuring that based on the number of statements or activity recorded for each actor in a given time frame. Another common question we often want to answer for our customers are, what are people doing or not doing in my learning ecosystem? What kind of activities are most popular? So here we're looking at what are the verbs or activities that are most popular in this particular ecosystem in this time frame. You can see that most people are viewing or answering questions in this particular ecosystem. And then what are the least frequent verbs? What are the activities that really aren't getting a whole lot of traction in this particular ecosystem? We're seeing things like pausing content is not common, liking content is not common. So in this particular setting, the vendor has offered their customers or their learners the ability to like and dislike content, have more of a social element to it, but it's not a feature that users are really taking advantage of. So really helpful to understand precisely what activities folks in your ecosystem are doing or not doing. Similarly, another common xAPI question we get is help me understand what content is most popular. Again, we're looking at kind of this intersection of activity or engagement by content. So you can filter this to either most popular content or least popular content. This is looking at object. Then we can start to look at things kind of on a dual axis, right? So we're looking at things like what activities are my most engaged actors doing? So now we're looking at engagement at the actor level, you know, which actors are showing the most engagement or highest activity levels, not just that, but what precisely are they doing? And this data view is a little bit small, but our top engaged employee here, she's doing a whole lot of answering questions. She's actually doing a whole lot of launching content, etc. These kind of views can be really helpful as you start to build out profiles of learner behavior as a best practice for other learners, right? If our top employee right here is very highly engaged, very highly performing, it's really helpful to understand what is she doing, what content is she working in, and then start to use that to develop a series of best practices to share with other learners in the ecosystem to help them achieve similar levels of success as well. And then similarly, we can see what kind of activities are happening in my most popular content. So this is that intersection of object and verb. So for each one of these top performing objects or objects that are most popular in the organization, we want to see what are people actually doing in those particular pieces of content. So in this one here that has the most, you can see that for the most part, people are either launching content or they're quitting it, right? This is looks like a very simple landscape of the kind of activities people are actually able to do within this particular piece of content. The second most popular piece of content here has a lot more variety in the kinds of activities then folks can actually take as they're interacting with the content. So again, really helpful to see not just are people interacting with content, but how are they interacting with that content. One question that we get a lot, and this is becoming more and more popular as organizations are using a more distributed learning ecosystem or offering different types of learning experiences to learners across a variety of different platforms and resources. One question that they almost always have is, well, which platforms are actually getting the most engagement? I'm offering, you know, an LMS, and there's a mobile app and a video app, and now we have a VR app, et cetera, et cetera. What are people actually using? So after the data has been unified and kind of standardized using xAPI, you can get this nice snapshot view of platform adoption. And this particular view shows us engagement or number of statements across 4 different platforms that are in use. So you can see at a glance the platform or learning experience that's clearly the most popular is the actual LMS in this particular case. All right, so those are some of the really basic questions that we can help answer when it comes to just pure basic xAPI data. Now there's some really, really cool things that you can do with xAPI data as well, given how much flexibility there is in building out very specific elements of data in there to answer more complex questions. So I'll give you a couple of examples. These first set of examples are actually designed for specifically used by an instructional designer. So if someone is designing content, there's a series of more complex questions that they probably want to be able to measure as they're looking at how users are engaging with the content they've created. One question that we hear quite frequently from instructional designers are, how are learners progressing through my course and where does drop-off occur? So you'll see we've got 2 very different views to answer this these questions. I'm going to start with the one on the right, actually. This is showing you, think of a course as a series of modules. And in this case, these modules happen in a timeline where you have to finish the first before you go into the second. You'll see the view here is the modules are top to bottom. It's the top being the first module, this bottom one being the last module a learner would go through. And we're showing percent completion by module here. So you can see that learners are progressing when 100% of our learners are completing the first 4 modules in this course. But then we experience a pretty significant drop-off from Module 4 to Module 5, and then some additional drop-off between 5, 6, and 7, and then remain pretty consistent through the remainder of the course. So just a nice, helpful view for a content author to say, all right, clearly something's happening in this 5th module. Let me take a look at that, and let me figure out where and how I'm losing my learners here. Why do we see such a cliff and drop-off here? Another way to think about this exact same question is actually at the individual level. So at the left here, you see all of the learners who are taking the course at a given time. Now, this course is designed in a way in which you don't have to go through each module kind of subsequently. You can jump around in the course. So this is an interesting view to show you which modules have been completed by which users. And you'll see that there are certain modules where we have 100% completion rate, like this purple one here and this darker colored one next to it. And you have other modules where you have a much lower completion rate, the second module here with the blue. So again, an interesting way for an instructional designer to kind of build data visualization to help them at a glance see and understand where and how users are interacting with the different components of the course that they've built. Another common question that we'll get from instructional designers is that in a platform that allows for discussion to happen and have some of that data captured via xAPI, oftentimes people want to understand which topics or courses are actually driving the most discussion, and of that discussion, what is the interaction? Do we have a lot of questions? Do we have a lot of comments? Who on the team is actually demonstrating good leadership and mentorship abilities by answering questions for others, so on and so forth. So this is a simple view of us being able to capture some of that very detailed interaction data around discussion forums, capturing it kind of at the topic level and capturing exactly what kind of activity is happening with each one of those. So an example here is our top topic here clearly has the most engagement from a discussion standpoint, but interestingly enough, it's this bottom topic that actually has the most subscribers. So you could infer that this bottom topic has a ton of interest, but not a lot of activity, which is an interesting way to think about that particular topic relative to other topics. Another common question is which resources, as an instructional designer, which resources are more popular? What's getting the most utilization of the items I'm putting in front of my learners? And here you just have a quick and easy data visualization that shows which of the following types of resources, from web pages to files to video to chat, so on and so forth, what is getting the highest engagement rates from the learners in the course, can help you kind of optimize the learner experience in future courses. Another great example of xAPI being used to get more granular understanding of learner behavior within a course is this view here. So this is actually coming from a VR application. In a VR application, you have different scenes that build up a scenario, and in those scenes, typically, you have a variety of different ways that the learner can interact with the virtual environments they find themselves in. Sometimes it can be a question, right? You know, click here, it's multiple choice, choose your answer. Sometimes it could just be an engagement like click here to learn more, watch this video, etc. So this is a great way to think about building out those xAPI statements so you can better understand how learners are interacting with each scene in a VR scenario. The one we're looking at right here, this particular scene actually had a multiple choice question that was embedded in it. So you can see at a high level how many participants took this particular scene, their average time spent in scene, and for this question, what's the ratio of correct answers to incorrect answers. You can also see of the multiple choice options here, what are users actually choosing? So a nice way to kind of break down and understand in a really granular way how learners are interacting with the content being made available to them. And in this case, it is an assessment as well. So you're getting some good performance data here. Moving on, you can use xAPI to develop metrics for lots of different roles, not just instructional designers. Here's an example of some data visualizations that we have developed for program administrators before. So program admins tend to have access to all of the data and are monitoring things at a much higher level, thinking about overall success of the program that they're responsible for. So there's things like, talk to me about the total number of interactions or engagements within the program right now. Has this changed? This is a relative indicator that shows us the change week over week. All of that is configurable. They also want to know things like, in this particular example, talk to me about engagement by location. So all of my learners are spread across a large geographic area. I want to understand which geographic areas are getting the most engagement. Am I getting new users signing up versus repeat users? And what kind of courses are they actually signing up for across different locations? Another interesting way to think about administrative data are things like, what are the trends and patterns in the data that we're seeing? This particular view is showing us across all the course catalogs being made available to the full spectrum of learners, which topics or course topics are most popular. And we also are looking at trends here, so looking at over time, are we seeing particular topics increase in popularity and other ones decrease in popularity? So those are just some examples of data visualizations that can be built for program administrators as they monitor the success of the programs that are being offered. Similarly, we've got metrics built for executives. Executives take things even a step higher, the way they're thinking about success of the overall organization and how some of the learning and development programs that are being produced are actually tying directly to business outcomes. You know, things like show me activity across all the platforms being made available in my ecosystem, because executives are going to be interested in kind of optimizing distributed learning ecosystem to get the most out of the platforms and start to sunset platforms where we're not getting value. Understanding the interests and the topic areas that your employees are actually focused on can be a really interesting thing for executives to think about as it relates to workforce planning and how they want to develop their workforce over the next 3 to 5 years. And then last but not least, thinking about ratings of the instructors and the quality of content that's being made available to employees and learners, also really helpful for an executive kind of assess the overall success of their learning and development programming. All right, so the last topic here is probably my favorite. I just love thinking about where we can go with this in the future, because there's such great work happening in the space of innovation and research and development as it relates to learning analytics, data visualizations, etc. So let me start with actually kind of a basic one. So when we think about virtual reality, which is becoming a more and more popular way to help create immersive learning opportunities for learners, and also a really, really nice, nicely suited environment for xAPI, because it gives you the opportunity to actually gather super high resolution activity and engagement data in this immersive environment. Not always able to do that with more traditional learning environments. So xAPI paired with virtual reality can actually give you mountains and mountains of super useful and interesting information. This is a screenshot here of a flight simulator. That in and of itself, you can get some really great information on, start to track the precise decision-making path that a pilot goes through as they experience different scenarios in a virtual environment, flying a plane. But think about, remember with xAPI, you not only get high-resolution data, but you get interoperability with that as well. So we can actually take the stream of data coming from the virtual environment in which the pilot is operating, and we can also pull in additional data sources like biometric data. An example here would be a pilot going through a series of not optimal scenarios where you have engine failure or some other dramatic event that's happening. Not only through the virtual environment can you track their responses and their actions, but through biometric additions like heart rate monitors, et cetera, you can actually track their physical response to these highly stressful environments. An example here on the right would be the activity data in a simulation mapped to heart rate data coming through a heart rate monitor. really, really helpful additional information that can be layered on top of each other that gives you a full spectrum 360 view of the learner's full experience, including physical reactions to a virtual environment. Applications here are really fantastic for anyone that has to work in a high-stress environment. Exposing them to high-stress environments and helping them to manage, engage their own reactions and decision-making in a virtual environment is the safest way to help prepare them for those kind of high-stress scenarios in the real world. So interesting application of xAPI and something we can actually do today. This is not a particularly futuristic example. Let's talk about one that is becoming a little bit more futuristic. One of the things that we talk about a lot here is the concept of real-time 3D immersive analytics. So not just having an immersive learning experience like a 3D or like a virtual training experience, but actually being able to interact with the analytics themselves in a 3D environment. Application here, again, I think about it in terms of high-stress applications or environments, like having firefighters and emergency workers having access to real-time analytics and data kind of on their backs when they need it, directly in front of them in a 3D environment, could save lives, could help them make better decisions in the moment, certainly for soldiers, medical environment, et cetera. So 3D, thinking about developing real-time analytics, providing information to folks when they need it, where they need it, and built into the environment in which they're currently working in, such a cool way to think about the future of learning analytics. One thing I will note is that the pictures you're looking at here made me think a little bit of the movie Minority Report. Minority Report was 100% science fiction. All of the pictures you're looking at here are real, coming out of data labs, mainly at universities. So this idea of developing real-time 3D immersive analytics is something that's real and something that I think we can start taking advantage of in the near future. So really cool way to think about not just what kind of data do I want to get out of my programs, but how do I want to experience the data itself. So with that is my last slide. Actually, these are a bunch of screenshots from the Netflix movie Anon. I don't know if any of you have seen it, but kind of a cool way to think about maybe where we're going in the future with having access to real-time data overlaid on your everyday experiences. What you're seeing here is the actual view of someone in this movie as they're walking down a street and seeing people. The data about the subjects that they're seeing are being delivered to them in real time, kind of overlaid on real life information. Obviously, we're not here yet, but kind of a cool way, again, to think about kind of the future of data and, again, how we will actually experience data itself and get the most out of all of the data assets that are made available to us. That's everything I got. Any questions for me at this point, Peter?
All right. Well, thank you, Britt. Fantastic presentation. Really loved it. Lots of great examples. I will comment for the audience that I'm glad I watched Anon, but I didn't love it. You know, it's one of those things that's worth watching, but, you know, could have been a better movie too. But
I agree. I think.
Go ahead.
I totally agree with you. Actually, Minority Report I agree with. But again, I'm a big data geek, so there are certain elements of it that I was like, oh, that's really cool, even if the movie itself wasn't the best.
There's a lot of movies that I say, oh, I still haven't seen, and people can't believe it. Minority Report is one of those movies. I really need to go back and see it. But talking about more real data today, loved your real world examples and fantastic learning examples from xAPI data. I'm sure one thing that people are going to be asking, and could be mad if I don't ask, is where did those visualizations come from? Are those all from Yet? Are some of them, customized? Are some of them outside of Yet?
Great question. So
and I can go back.
All of the basic data visualizations that I showed, everything around active verb object,
Yep.
context, etc. These are all
yep.
directly out of the Yet Learning Record Store.
Mm-hmm.
Exactly. So these are part of our standard data visualizations in our standard dashboard suite.
Yep.
And again, we built these out of lots and lots of conversations with folks and kind of pulling together, these are the most common questions that we get as it relates to just basic xAPI data. Now, all of the other ones you see on the more complex questions and resulting data visualizations, most of those are actually going to be custom data visualizations that we've built for customers specifically on the KPIs and success measures that they care about the most coming from their own data set. And this particular view right here, the VR view, if anyone's interested in learning more about VR course design, there's a really fantastic application called Scenario VR coming out of Trivanta.
Yes.
It's probably the first easy to use and intuitive platform I've ever seen where you can build virtual reality 360 training experiences that has xAPI pre-built into it and these resulting visualizations.
Yeah, they had a special offer last cohort, and I don't know that we heard back from them this cohort. But if anybody's interested in checking out Scenario VR, message me on Slack, and here's my cat speaking up again. Message me on Slack, and I will get you in touch, see if that cohort offer is still going on. Fantastic. What about, are there other visualization or BI tools that you'd recommend people take a look at? And maybe it's not just xAPI.
Sure. Yeah, so realistically, any of the LRS vendors are probably going to offer a really nice comprehensive suite of data visualizations well suited to xAPI data statement design. So you'll get some of those like basic questions answered using any of the LRS vendors. And again, like I think we're part of a really great community that cares very much about data visualization and design. So it doesn't matter who you go with, you'll probably get some really great output from it. When it comes to the more complex or customized versions, we've done work with customers in Tableau and in Power BI. Those are probably the two most popular. But once you understand and you've done the work in data planning, so you're actually kind of mapping out, these are the success metrics I care about. Here's I'm going to map each one of those metrics back to the data that I'm building out of my courses. As you build all of that out, you can really use any of the BI tools out there. And again, I think Tableau and Power BI are the two most popular that we've seen to actually build your own data visualizations that can be really powerful and customized to your needs. So generally, any LRS, you can get the basics, and then you can either use some of the customizable versions with an LRS or a more robust set of BI tools to actually build your own custom and more complex data viz tied to more complex business outcomes you want to measure.
Great, thank you for that. Had one other thing in mind. That's last week, Shelley spoke to the cohort, and he talked, your colleague there at Yet, and he talked a little about Dave. Do you want to, just for people who might have missed that, do you want to talk a little about how Dave intersects with what you're talking about here?
Sure. So Dave is a really cool way to make xAPI-based data visualization accessible to anyone. The Dave framework itself is built open source, so it can live on top of any LRS or data xAPI data source, which is kind of cool. And then the way Dave is built is you actually start to, we're building out over time. Right now it's just in alpha, but it is a working alpha. You can actually go in and play with it. But what we are trying to do over time is build out a combination of questions, or think of those as your success measures, the things you care about, right? Questions could be things like, who are my most engaged actors, or what content is most popular, what time frame, when does learning happen, like when does engagement happen the most, across a week, time frame, et cetera. So you take some questions, you can enter in your own questions, or we have a preset set of questions that can be overlaid on top of data. There's an associated algorithm with that question, and then you can choose the data visualization itself. So the process is you choose your data set from an LRS, and again, it's any LRS. Then you choose the question that you want to answer. You align that to an algorithm that's pre-built for that particular question, and then you choose the outcome, the output data visualization. So this is where you can say, I want to see this in a line graph or a pie chart or a polar chart, etc. So it's a really nice, configurable, user-friendly way to start to get some pre-baked data visualizations out of any xAPI data set.
Great. Very well explained. Thank you for that. I think that just about does it on my questions. I'm glad we got the opportunity to do this separately, actually, because it gave us a chance to dive a little bit deeper in, and we don't have to rush off to talk about cohort business. So, again, fantastic presentation.
Yeah.
Thank you again for giving us your time.
Oh, thank you so much.
Yeah.
And thank you for the opportunity. And please, for anyone that listens, feel free to reach out, ask questions. I'm happy to chat more. I love this stuff.
Okay. Thanks a lot.
Oh, thank you so much. Take care.